Let's dive right into this explainer and absolutely deconstruct the one-dimensional Hollywood caricature of General George S. Patton. You know, when most of us hear that name, we immediately picture George C. Scott's iconic roaring portrayal on the silver screen, right? We picture this brash, scowling showman barking orders, covered in shiny helmets, rocking those pearl-handled revolvers. And honestly, that image is permanently burned into our cultural memory. But today, we're going to look entirely past that surface-level legend. We are going to peel back the layers of this roaring general to reveal the quiet, pioneering military mastermind hiding underneath. We shall attack and attack until we are exhausted, and then we shall attack again. Okay, we're kicking things off loud and aggressive, right in the spirit of his famous public persona, Old Blood and Guts. He delivered lines exactly like this one, with an intense, frankly terrifying conviction to show the sheer driving force of his command. But here is what's absolutely vital to understand. This wasn't just some crazy, off-the-cuff motto. No, it was a highly calculated psychological weapon. This unrelenting aggression was carefully designed to strike pure terror into the hearts of the Axis powers, all while demanding absolute, uncompromising forward momentum from his own guys. Section 1. Old Blood and Guts. Now let's look at how this aggressive public image completely masked a highly calculated intellect. To truly understand Patton, we literally have to contrast the man the press loved to write about with the methodical historian who actually commanded the armies. The legend, of course, is built on the flashy helmets, the endless profanity, the famous ivory-handled 357 Magnum. It paints a picture of this purely impulsive brawler. But the reality? Completely different. During the interwar years, Patton spent his quiet hours meticulously studying ancient history and modern tank doctrine. He was heavily corresponding with British armored warfare theorists. Imagine him sitting in his tent, reading Greek campaigns and taking voluminous notes. The showmanship, the swearing, the bravado, that was just a deliberate manufactured tool meant to inspire a fierce warrior spirit in men who were facing the absolute horrors of war. The real Patton was a profoundly calculated intellectual. Section 2. Pioneering armored warfare. Let's slow down for a second and examine how he built his revolutionary approach to war. The crucial point here is that he systematically built this from the ground up. Way back in the dust of Mexico in 1916, serving under General Pershing, Patton essentially led the U.S. Army's first motorized raid. It was a brutal, visceral introduction to mechanized speed, culminating with him literally strapping the bodies of Pancho Villa's men to the hoods of Dodge touring cars. Fast forward to 1918, World War I, and he's forming the 1st Light Tank Battalion. Picture him leading men into combat using borrowed, primitive French Renault tanks that reeked of fumes and didn't even have basic radios. He wasn't just driving tanks. He was inventing the tactical doctrine of how to use them. Through decades of relentless advocacy, he pushed the military toward mechanization, commanded a brigade in the new armored force in 1940, and finally became the foundational architect of American tank warfare when he unleashed the Third Army in 1944. So his incredible battlefield successes, they weren't born of reckless luck. Not at all. They were anchored entirely in 4 deeply intellectual principles of combat. First, he totally rejected the orthodox World War I strategies that relied on slow, grinding attrition. Instead, he wanted pure shock to break the enemy's will. Second, he championed combined arms. Think of this like a unified fist. Tanks act as the knuckles, infantry as the muscle, and air support as the eyes, all striking together at the exact same time. Third, he favored operational initiative, operating under this highly counterintuitive philosophy that speed is your true security. Basically, if you move faster than the enemy can react, they simply can't hit you. And finally, he demanded the absolute ruthless exploitation of intelligence. Section 3. The information advantage. And this brings us to a surprisingly modern concept. This is something Patton utilized long before the digital age even existed. Imagine you're playing a high-stakes game of chess, right? But you get to see your opponent's moves before they even touch the pieces, all while they are forced to play blindfolded. That, right there, is an information advantage. Patton aggressively hunted for this condition. He knew that if he could maintain crystal-clear situational awareness of the battlefield while completely blinding the enemy to his own movements, he would stay permanently inside their decision-making cycle. Honestly, this is a concept that modern military planners and even elite business strategists still rigorously study today. And he executed this flawlessly. Let's break it down. First, he acquired top-secret ultra-intelligence, decrypted German communications so he could see the strategic big picture. Second, he locked down friendly communications with merciless signal security. Third, and this is perhaps the most fascinating part, he created the Army Information Service, or AIS. He basically repurposed a cavalry unit to act as what he called a directed telescope. Imagine young guys on motorcycles speeding past generals and all the bureaucratic red tape to bring the visceral, unvarnished realities of the front line directly to Patton's ear. He knew what was happening the exact moment it happened. Finally, he actively jammed and deceived German radio networks. He seamlessly combined all these elements to outthink the enemy long before he ever had to outshoot them. Section 4. Unleashing the Third Army. Let's speed the pacing back up a bit to match his breakout from Normandy. 200,000. In August of 1944, empowered by that superior intelligence we just talked about, Patton took a massive calculated risk. General Omar Bradley actually called the maneuver flat impossible, and it's pretty easy to see why. Patton decided to rapidly funnel 200,000 men and 40,000 vehicles through this tiny, incredibly vulnerable coastal corridor at Avranches. I mean, it was a complete logistical nightmare. The roads were totally jammed, the margins for error were practically non-existent, and if the Germans had closed that narrow bottleneck, Patton's entire army would have been trapped and potentially destroyed. But because he entirely trusted his information advantage, he just jammed his foot on the accelerator. The timeline of this breakout is wild. It's like watching a fast break in basketball where the defense doesn't even realize the ball was stolen yet. On August 1st, Patton breaks out of the Avranches corridor, and the German high command is completely unaware of the massive buildup. By August 5th, he's tearing deep into Brittany and Mayenne, and the Germans are only just rubbing their eyes, waking up to the monumental scale of the threat. And then by August 9th, he executes this hard hook north to Alencon, effectively forcing the German forces into the Falaise pocket. He moves so blazingly fast, weaponizing his intelligence, that the German 7th Army was constantly, desperately reacting to maneuvers Patton had finished making days prior. He fully credited top-secret ultra intercepts for this monumental success. Because he had the ultimate information advantage, he knew exactly where the Germans weren't, and that allowed him to do the unthinkable. He left his flanks seemingly completely unguarded. Instead of holding forces back just to protect his sides, he concentrated all his combat power directly on the offensive spearhead. Think about that for a second. Saving the surfaces of 2 whole divisions isn't just a dry military statistic. It means tens of thousands of human beings didn't have to be deployed into a grinding, deadly war of attrition on the flanks. It saved immense human and material capital. Section 5. The Relief of Bastogne. Now, let's look at what is arguably his strategic masterpiece. 48 hours. When the Germans launched the massive, desperate surprise offensive that we now know as the Battle of the Bulge, Patton achieved what military historians universally consider a sheer logistical miracle. He stood up and promised General Eisenhower he could attack with 3 divisions in just days. The room full of Allied commanders actually laughed at him, thinking he was just boasting. But he wasn't. In the middle of a brutal, freezing winter, Patton literally pivoted an entire army. We're talking hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and supply trucks, 90 degrees in just 48 hours, to strike the flank of the German advance. It required rerouting miles of convoys on icy, snow-covered roads in the dead of night. It was a staff officer's absolute nightmare, conquered through sheer willpower and unmatched organizational discipline. His forces marched day and night through freezing temperatures, battling biting snowstorms, exhaustion, and really heavy German resistance. The conditions were absolutely miserable. Yet, thanks to his highly flexible command structure and just relentless drive, the spearhead of the 4th Armored Division finally broke through the ice and the enemy lines. On December 26th, they reached the besieged, freezing paratroopers of the 101st Airborne, successfully shattering the German siege of Bastogne. It was a moment of profound triumph and exhausting relief, and it totally cemented his philosophy that unparalleled mobility and shock could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Section 6. A complex, lasting legacy. Let's zoom out to evaluate the sheer, staggering scale of the Third Army's final march. 10,000 miles. To truly understand the scale of the Third Army's final march, you really have to contextualize that distance. Pushing relentlessly through France, tearing into Germany, and eventually reaching Austria and Czechoslovakia,
Patton's forces fought across an astonishing 10,000 miles of territory. This wasn't just some casual Sunday drive. It was a non-stop, exhausting, heavily contested push across an entire continent, maintaining a daily speed and momentum that left both the enemy and, frankly, his own supply lines gasping to keep up.
The final metrics of his campaign are honestly staggering. Over 1.25 million enemy prisoners captured, over 530,000 enemy casualties inflicted. General Eisenhower rightly called them a fighting force unmatched in the world. But the tactical numbers only tell half the story of this legacy. His forces were also responsible for the solemn, devastating liberation of Nazi concentration camps like Ohrdruf and Buchenwald. When Patton, the hardened, swearing general who loved the poetry of war, walked through those camps, the sheer humanitarian horror broke him. The smell and the sight of the Holocaust left the toughest general in the United States Army physically ill. He threw up against a building, weeping at the depravity. It adds a profoundly heavy, deeply human depth to the man behind the myth. Because he loved the cavalry, wrote poetry, and literally carried a saber, a lot of his contemporaries thought he was just a romantic relic of a bygone 19th century era of warfare. But look at how he actually fought. He leveraged real-time data, combined arms, and psychological shock with terrifying modern efficiency. So how does our understanding of war change when we realize its loudest, most colorful showman was actually its most calculating innovator? Was General George S. Patton a figure of the past, or was he truly the first architect of modern information age combat? I'll leave you to think about that dichotomy. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the reality behind the myth. I hope you found this explainer as fascinating as I did.